in the nightmare of reading up how every single part of Unity's lighting system works, I have found the nightmares.
Welcome to Metaverse Degen. I'm lying. Unfortunately, Raptor's not here again. He is currently working in a middle of a 12-hour shift. But I am joined here by our guests today. Oh, who are you?
Hello, my name. Oh, my name's Apple Blossom. I'm a shader goblin and a avatar commission worker sometimes. And then this is my memory eye puppy, Adidas. He's here because my memory doesn't work. And because he's the director of the SNR hologram stuff. But,
Oh, wow. Well, I'm excited to have both of you here. Thank you very much for your time. It's greatly appreciated to have you here. So I would ask you, what is it both of you known for? But I think you've sort of answered that already. And how did you get started with everything?
let's see. With everything.
Yes.
Where do I start? Back
Yes.
in time?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, where do I start? Roblox? Roblox. All right. So
Roblox.
dumb little kid, like 10 years old, finds this stupid website called Roblox, and decides that they want to make video games, and then continues on that path for a really long time, going to college for coding and then going into what was it? Oh, and then I actually got a job in Unity development in college, and I am scatterbrained today. What did I do after that? Oh, I had gotten a job working for a Roblox developer who was a fairly large name in the space. But then a little after COVID hit, I ended up in Vrchat, and I found out that they do Unity here as well. And so I was like, I know how to do this. We'll just take the skills here, move them over there. Turns out it's not that simple, and I had to relearn a bunch of things. But found a specific interest in shader development along that line. And then this one, and we've known each other for 2 years at that point.
3 years. Yeah.
Messages me saying, "Hey, I've seen this particle screen before. Do you think it'd be possible to make one that can go on any mesh?" And I said, "Probably. Let me look into it." Found some uh, found where Unity does their particle shader rendering, and then found another shader on GitHub that also went into point cloud rendering, kind of mashed everything together, made a little shader, and then hosted a event at a world where the screens were wrapped around pillars and made of particles.
Oh.
And then you send me another message saying, "Hey, what if we set it up like this, and then it would make shapes?" And I didn't understand what he was talking about. It didn't make any sense in my head. But then we actually got it running, and it rendered out shapes, and you could send it the video of any shape that you give it in Touch Designer, and then it would show up in the world made out of particles in 3D. And then the hologram was born. And those are the two big things that I'm known for, and you're known for the holograms. And for being a DJ.
And doing Modular Monday.
Being followed by Tupper on Twitter, the big accolade.
No.
That's the big one.
Wow. Wow, sounds like you've been up to a lot. So I have a bunch of questions for both of you, but first I also would like to ask Adidos here, what are your origins here in the platform as well?
Oh, geez. I definitely started here back in, right before the Ugandan Knuckles phase. I've always been interested in VR. I had, a dev kit 2 back in the day, just to, run around and try stuff. and eventually found my way to VRchat back then, and then had a come and go relationship with the whole thing. Browsing public lobbies and black hats every now and then. And then COVID hit. I hadn't tried VR in a while, so I picked up a Quest 2. I was like, I need to socialize. I'm stuck at home. And so dragged a couple friends into that experience, and I've been here ever since. Found like the music scene, the rave scene. Uh, Started doing my own music, like live performance hardware music, inside of VRChat, with a couple friends that I met, who run Modular Monday, and so we do that every week.
Wow.
And then started working on stuff with Apple. I had like weird ideas, and then I'd ask her because she's the Unity nerd that I know, and she would bounce back if it was reasonable or possible or a dumb idea, and I still do that to this day. Um, and then we just make stuff together that's kind of interesting and fun, and we've been kind of wallflowers for a couple of years, I think, in the scene overall, and people have started reaching out a lot lately about like what we're working on, and it's really exciting to see people enjoy some of the stuff we've been creating.
Wow.
Mm.
So with your now, I'm gonna bounce back between the two of you, so I do apologize. Prepare for some whiplash questions. Uh, I do that a lot. So you mentioned you came from Roblox and a VR chat into a very different building experience. What was that building experience between the two like for you? And do you prefer building in Roblox or VR chat more?
Mm. So I had been on Roblox doing Roblox development from I can't remember which years, but I stopped well before they started transitioning into their own game engine because the platform is like you make games as if it was a game engine, but they also provide the backend networking for you and the user base. So, the Roblox at the time had been more of like a Lego simulator. So you'd just like build Legos with your friends, and they added scripting just as an afterthought, basically. But that took off on its own, and now it's more like basically just Unity, but with Legos still. But back then it was a lot more. You had to really work around the platform's controls to do anything. I definitely prefer the actual game engine style now, but I wouldn't have back then. It's a bit harder to get into because a lot of boilerplate with engines, and it's a lot of extra weird things you have to learn instead of just being drag and drop.
Hmm. Interesting. So Roblox is a drag and drop style thing, and so is it easier? Would you say that helped you get into doing what you're doing now, or would you say those your origin? I guess where most of your knowledge has started in VR chat.
Um, well, it wasn't really drag and drop for any of the like anything
Oh,
except building specifically. But I'm more of a coder, so though neither of those really apply to me. Um,
okay,
code's code. Doesn't matter what language it is, it's always going to be complicated.
okay.
Um, Sorry, I think I missed the second half of that.
No, it's
I I
a-okay.
focused on the first thing you said, and I was like, "Hold on." I missed the rest of it.
It's all right. I do apologize. Fair warning. I kind of ask layered questions, so if you need me to clarify anything, please ask me to clarify.
I'll ask my my memory eye dog if I need clarification on a question where I forgot halfway through it.
Oh. So with
What
you,
was the second half?
I think you answered it okay.
Okay.
yes. So with you, Adidas, you said once you got into the rave scene, is that when you started picking up more hobbies and crafts from here within VR chat? And what about the scene made you want to stay?
Well, I had always like tinkered with music. I was in a band for a long time. I grew up playing music. kind of self-taught or whatever. But I was like in a small punk band and booked a tour for like 5 or 6 stops, kind of small local stops across a few states or whatever. And it was on the first show that we did, I realized I had really bad stage fright. Like I was getting tunnel vision and panic attacks and like sweats. And I was like, oh dang, I should have tried doing this earlier and not booked a tour the first time I tried performing like this. So I've always had really bad stage fright, and so getting into the rave scene and just like seeing other people just kind of like throw down and do it regularly, and you just start to kind of get to know those people, and they kind of push you. Like they realize you have an interest in something, but you might be too timid or too anxious to try it. And so, it's they try to lower expectations so that you're not stressed when you do it. And it took me a long time. Like one of my friends, Shaggy, she booked me one time for doing she has an event called Plantasia. And she booked me for that one time, and it was like for me a big deal because like I had always admired Shaggy's work on world building and music and visuals, and this is a couple years ago now, so we're still really good friends today. But I told her beforehand I was sick for days, like 2 days beforehand. I was like in bed with a stomach ache, like just really anxious, thinking about it, and it's really helped me kind of over the years get used to being at the center of attention. I can tune out a lot of that anxiety a little bit better, a little bit better coping mechanisms with that. That's not just me lying in bed for 2 days beforehand, freaking out. And then, I was doing live music on my own and playing with synths, and then Shaggy's like, hey, there's this group of people that do live music. You should come out. And I said, okay, sure. And then that's when I met the Modular Monday crew, and the same thing happened. I was anxious. They booked me one time, and I stressed about it way too much, and I think I crashed in the middle of my set. I like lost power or something, and went to go like I was just freaking out. I was just like, oh, that was the worst or whatever. And then I come back and they're all telling me how good I did or whatever, and they were really impressed. And people that I had admired for a long time were coming up to me and saying I did a good job, and that felt nice. And so I stuck around and kept doing it, and now it's not so much an issue.
Wow.
Not to say I don't get butterflies still, but it definitely doing that for a few years has really helped my social anxiety and performance.
Wow, that's actually really cool to hear. So something you found interesting helped you break out of some habits and anxieties.
Yeah, for sure. I think honestly that's a pretty common story, and once I realized that and talking to other people who perform, I'm not the only person with that experience, and there's a lot of people here that are doing, or, they're going through the same thing. They just have that anxiety in them, and doing it is not really. I guess it's kind of exposure therapy, but yeah. So once I realized and internalized that that's more common than I thought, it made it a little bit easier.
Okay. So I want to ask both of you a question as well. Since both of you mentioned you're on collaborative projects like the particle one, which led into the hologram, as well as some of the worlds you've built. What was some of the things that inspired you guys to start working on that project, and what was some of the first editions like?
Oh.
Oh, the first editions. Oh my
Oh
God.
boy.
There were the inspirations. Well, we mentioned the inspiration a little bit was there had been a few particle worlds that had already been out. Well, like one, right?
Well,
Um,
there was a couple. So, TennyXC, she's a great visualist, world builder. Really tries to push the visual component of like the rave scene. She did like a test event one time with a particle screen, and then um, my friend Como invited me out one time to like an ambient night, and they did a new world with that. Ozlex did that one, and I know I bought the prefab on Booth that has this particle screen, and was looking at it and realized that you can't use it on any object or any mesh, right? It's basically a material you throw on like your avatar, right? But for a world screen, and it's restricted to only being used with the basically the FBX it comes with, and it's just like a flat plane or a circle or a curved screen, and that's all you can use it for.
Hmm.
And so I went to her as my brain started cranking, like, how can I use this to make something 3D? Like, it's cool that it shoots these particles out, but is there a way to like wrap something up and then place something in the center, you know? And so early on, it was like, hey, what if we applied this to a like a cube or something? And I was talking to her, and I don't think you had touched shaders too much or at all. And you went to work and then came out with the prototype like the next day of something that worked with the particle screen.
So I had been messing with shaders, but not in Unity. I'd been doing it in Touch Designer for the VJing. Um, and so besides that, yeah, no, I hadn't touched it at all. And I had to really dig deep to try and figure out how any of it worked. It's real weird.
Oh,
Sorry, never mind.
dude,
Lost it.
don't be sorry. It's a-okay. Um, so with the first editions, what were some of the things that excited you to push forward into what you're currently working on?
So, with the first version didn't have any lighting in it whatsoever, and that was a big thing that I wanted. Lighting is complicated, and it's really difficult to do real-time moving lights. It's something that everything approximates to varying degrees, but it's been something I was really interested in at the time. So, while you had been sending me different shapes to put it on and see what it looked like, I had been trying to crank out different ways to make the lighting happen, which is kind of the really cursed stuff. If you remember is it the first or the second event?
That first event.
Yeah,
That
the
first
first
event
event
we
we ever
did.
showcased it, I did the lighting completely wrong, and everyone just like looked like the color of the light. It had just like replaced their entire avatar. It was bad. But the reflection probes were even worse. And a lot of different approaches, and eventually settled on something with voxels and magic code tracing math garbage. Exactly one of your viewers would know what it is. And so that person, DM me. I will explain it. It's so many words. What was I saying?
First event. The colors
First event, yeah,
didn't look
yeah.
very good.
Everyone's avatars were just replaced with color. There was nothing else. And we had been doing the voxels. I just didn't realize you had to like shoot off of each little pixel through the voxel, which is a whole lot of other math. And while I was doing that, you had been kept messing with the UVs and got the hologram concept together. It was
Yeah.
very, very, very
Yeah.
good.
I was at
So
work
we're
one day
focused
in a
on two very
really,
different
really
things.
boring meeting. Yeah. So while she was working on the lighting system, I was trying to think of like, how do I get these 3D objects to work? And like, it may not seem like it's that cool or whatever. I've seen a lot of versions of like, there's this cube in VRChat and you step inside of it and it makes a copy of you. Like, there's like a shader world that has a concept like that. There's stuff that's been coming out lately that kind of does that too. But there's never been a way to like send live video of something 3D, right? Like something in another program like Unreal Engine or another like window of Unity or Blender or whatever. And so I'm a systems engineer by trade, so like I kind of help design systems that kind of integrate and work together. And so I was in a really boring work meeting one day, and I was just jotting down like sketches of like how the system could work, and I had like a eureka moment, and I sent it to her that very same day. I was super excited with like this napkin drawing of how the system would work. And I was like, "Can we do this?" And then, she dummy checks me every time I say something dumb. And she didn't really understand what I was trying to do. And I was like, "Can you
Nope,
just do
I
it? Can
thought it
you
was
please
dumb.
just do it?" And then she did it. A couple. I think it took you a month or two to like get around to it. And then you finally did it, and it was just like boom. It was like magic. It worked just fine. Like that napkin drawing worked.
Look, I was focused on things only I care about and literally no one else does. Like the size of the voxel grid being larger. I had to spend 3 months on that instead of the hologram.
Oh. So, first of all, I'm going to seem like a mascot dub question. but I don't know what it is. What is a voxel?
Oh, we should also explain VJing after that. So a voxel is, have you ever seen Minecraft? Is a good way to explain it.
Yes, I've seen Minecraft.
Where, yeah, everything is made out of blocks. So if you could imagine every single particle in that world being a torch in a Minecraft world,
Okay.
and then all the light from those torches spreading out evenly across the Minecraft grid. That's the voxel grid. We turn the whole world into blocks. We shoot the light through the block version because it's less complex than the actual geometry.
Okay. That's good to know. Thank you for explaining that. I learned something. I enjoy learning things. And you did mention VJing. Where was your origins in that? And for those who may not know, what is VJing?
So VJing is the visual counterpoint to DJing for an audiovisual experience. You, as the VJ, take in the DJ's audio, you add your own visuals to it that will react to that audio, and then you output that into the world's screen so that people have something to look at while they're listening. And I had gotten into VJing because Shaggy randomly told you that I should try it. Just out of the
Yeah.
blue. I hadn't even met Shaggy at that point, or like once.
Yeah,
He
I
didn't
think
even
like
know
maybe
me.
once.
She didn't even know my name. Sorry. So yeah, she just comes and tells me, "Hey, you should VJ." And I was like, "Oh, it's fine, whatever." Down the touch designer, mess around with it. Fine. I really enjoy it because it's a lot of generative stuff, and I love generative art. Not like AI, but like writing a bunch of algorithms that generate patterns.
Okay.
Like if you have a checkerboard on an image program, the way it generates that checkerboard, I love that stuff. Very fun. And if you could imagine making the checkerboard expand to the beat of a song, that's basically the foundations of VJing.
Okay. So what made you want to stay and continue VJing after you were told by Shaggy one day you should do it?
I think I know the answer to
Well,
that one.
I I like code. I like it's a way to make art that really speaks to my skill set because I'm not good at I tried like hand drawing stuff and I like really like making art. I'm not very good at it in that sense, but writing code to make art really, really spoke to me. And having a place like Modular Monday to perform at where people get really excited no matter what I put on the screen, whether it be a 3D model of a toilet or a bunch of capybaras dancing or just random GeoCities gifs. Yeah, they just loved it. They ate it up no matter what. So I got to just experiment with code and do whatever I wanted.
Oh.
What do you think it was about that?
Yeah, that's pretty close.
Oh. So with this hologram thing you're working on, what from the current iterations, how much had to be learned to get it to work in the state it's currently at? And how much time did it take working on the project?
So if you count like the very first DM to you was like in July of last year,
Mm-hmm.
or June maybe, and then that's when the whole process started. So I mean, you had developed the first version of the screen. You worked on lighting. I worked on the design for the hologram. We reconvened sometime in October, and then had a prototype there. While you were still developing all your lighting stuff, and then we worked on some concepts up until December, and then we have some VJ friends that we knew. I don't know if you've met Silent. She's another really good VJ. She does stuff with like Sanctum and a bunch of other peeps. She's really talented. And so one day we were in a test world with this hologram that we had been experimenting with, and she joined off of us with like this idea. She says, "Hey, I have a really cool idea of how we can make a hologram." And then she turns around and it's like already built right behind her, like like it's just spinning, like it's all set up. And she's like, "Oh, you already did it." So yeah, we had a concept in October that was working, and then we had some small changes basically up until, well, for me, small changes. For her, she rebuilt the lighting system. I don't know how many times.
Uh, all the versions, we're at like 9 now.
Yeah, like ground up.
But that includes like spending a month doing something incorrect and having to rewrite a big portion of it. It has to be perfect. And actually, it also, for stuff I had to learn, it had to integrate with Unity Standard Shader, all of the features. It had to work with Bakery's light maps. It had to work with the 3D models that Baby Jack had developed for us. By the way, shout out to Baby Jack for the wonderful 3D models in the hologram world. Um, yeah, there's a lot of different things that all had weird issues that had to be dealt with before it would work. Because the lighting system also applies to the world objects on top of the players, and the world also has other lighting, and it all has to connect together correctly. That's difficult. A lot of little things. Learned about like physically based rendering shaders where they're actually like using material properties and algorithms we'd use to calculate the lightness in real life instead of just approximations. Just crazy stuff.
Wow.
Thankfully, most of Unity actually exposes that. So after rewriting it for a 5th time, I ended up just plugging it mostly back into Unity's lighting, but adding certain parts where I need to.
Wow.
And this, sorry.
Well, don't be sorry. I'm honestly quite shocked and impressed you had to go through that much to make it happen. And from what we've seen a little bit of one of the things you've made, blows my mind out of the water. This, give yourself lots of kudos for both of you.
So much. I really appreciate that.
Mm.
It's been a long journey, but once we got there, it was amazing. Like one of the top 10 nights of my life was the hologram release. The New Year's party was up there too. Both of those just had a lot of people there, a lot of people I respected, some people whose name I recognized from GitHubs I had been referencing. Shout out to the Shader Tricks GitHub for all of the weird, intimate VRchat shader knowledge and everyone at the Shader Discord. They're wonderful and very open community that will help anybody who comes along. If you're
Wow.
interested in programming, it's definitely a good resource.
Wow. So you mentioned a few things I'd like to ask about, but I'll start with what were those two events that you mentioned were some of the best nights of your life, like the release of the hologram and then New Year's Eve? What were both of those events, and what was the reception for both?
The New Year's Eve was that Jafel's birthday? Or was that just New Year's?
New Year's we did with Night Under Lights, and I think I
Oh,
performed with RB that night, and then J Flow's event I think was it was for his birthday. I
I'm
can't
getting
remember if that
them
was
mixed
after or before New
together.
Year's. Yeah, and then we did a set on Valentine's Day. You and I did a set on Moonpool,
Yeah.
where you VJ'd.
Cool.
And then the hologram release. Did we mention that?
Yeah, that happened 2 weeks ago. We did the hologram release.
It's for the first time we filled an instance and then had a queue going and with like 80 people, and it was very exciting. We had so many people show up from all different parts of different communities I'm in. I found two shader people and spent the entire time talking to them. Same thing happened at the Staples birthday. I like talking crafts with people who will listen, and because it's such a weird niche thing with not a lot of documentation, everyone who goes into it and gets really into it has different ways of approaching things, and it's always really interesting.
Hmm. Okay. Well, then I'm gonna lead another question. Why why do you think that is? Why there's not a lot of documentation for in the shader craft world?
Shaders are terrible. They're the worst to write. I've written Python code. I've written like net scraping bots before for basically for security stuff. I've written like games in Unity, of course. I've written so many languages, and none of them have been as weird or counterintuitive as shaders. They're so weird. The first things you learn when learning programming are the incorrect ways of doing things in shaders. You can't do if statements. It hurts performance. It's so weird. And the shader language compiles into different platforms very differently. So it's very difficult to support many platforms, which is why a lot of people don't get into the like nitty gritty build it from the bottom up shaders. They usually use something like Unity. And on top of all of that, it's a really niche application. Not a lot of people need to write shaders because you don't need a lot of shaders. You make like 3 good ones and then something for special effects that's custom in-house, and that's it. Unlike like regular scripting in games where you're making like hundreds of those for a single game. You don't need that many shaders. You need one shader, and usually the Unity built-in is good enough for whatever you're using.
Okay. So,
So
sorry, you continue. I apologize. Sorry for the
no,
rude
I was
interruption.
just gonna, yeah, it's niche. You don't need a lot of shaders, and the documentation is lacking because it's not used very often except by people who already know a lot of what they're doing.
Okay. So, what languages are there normally used to write shaders?
Proprietary, for Unity, it's HLSL, which then on Quest, I'm pretty sure, don't even know this for sure, I'm pretty sure cross compiles into GLSL, which means you have to double check performance for different platforms and write basically different shaders for them. Already a nightmare. What was the question?
What languages for shaders?
Oh yeah, HLSL, GLSL, and then the newer, more modern stuff is written in Vulkan. Thankfully, we're not in that Unity version yet. I don't think we will be for a while here in the Vrchat, so I get to still write my old, right down at the base shader code. Also, I forgot about this. Platforms like Unreal don't let you write the shaders directly. You can write snippets of scripts, but mostly people will use a graph-based nodal shader system, which is a lot more intuitive for people to write. Because you're evaluating like a million pixels every single frame, there's no good way to like debug what each pixel is doing on each frame. It's really difficult and weird to do that. So it's really difficult to actually debug what's going on in your shaders. But if you have a visual representation of what your shader is doing, which is what most of these graph-based systems have, then it's not nearly an issue. And that's actually why Unity's newest version, including the one that we're on now, has a built-in shader graph editor where you just plug in nodes and you get to do all the work there and then have Unity take care of the rest on the internals.
Okay. Oh, sounds like it's well beyond my knowledge to even try. So, I give you lots of kudos for knowing all of that.
Well, it's the nice part about the graph stuff. I'll complain about it a little bit because I'd prefer to have the option, but with the graphs, you really just like plug stuff in.
Mm.
You take an image, you drag it in, you plug the output of that image to the color of your shader, and then your shader shows the image. Whereas to do the same exact thing in like shader language, you have to write out all of the semantics to load the texture into the GPU and then have the GPU sample at the right pixel and all this other garbage that you don't have to deal with the graphs. So the graphs are a lot more approachable, mostly because it's what you see is what you get, and you can see what it looks like during each step of the process.
Okay. So, looping back into the hologram as well, did you use coding or graph or the graph system that you mentioned to work on the hologram system?
We actually started it before the graphs were a thing in Unity. But even if they were, they're really buggy in the current version of Unity that we use. Vrchat has always been behind Unity versions from the most recent release, and there's a lot of reasons for that. You don't want to constantly update to the most recent version because all the scripts that were written back here before your current update will all be deprecated and they won't work anymore. And so if you update Unity versions and old stuff stops working, you have a lot of dead worlds where people won't update it. So we're a few versions behind. That'll always be the case. And the most recent versions have decent graph editors, but the current one just sucks, so I would never use it. Even without that, though, I prefer coding. It's what I grew up doing. I don't like doing the graph stuff if I don't have to.
Okay. So what now that you're showcasing the hologram system, what are you hoping it would be used for? What was your end goal thinking of, like, once it's fully out and usable?
Well, I
I'm
mean,
a
we want it for visuals, for other people to kind of do their own art on, right? Is kind of the idea of it.
Yeah, I don't make the art. I make the canvas so that the artists, the VJs, can roll in and build some, like, paint just a beautiful picture on the canvas. Uh, so it's not what, well, it is exactly what the VJs want to do with it. It's whatever they want to put in. When we do shows, it's usually something very unique. A lot of VJs will actually code their own stuff. So just seeing what they would create with it is really what we were focused on.
Oh, so what if that has any VJs built anything on it yet?
Yeah, so we did an event last Friday, and we had a couple of our friends that were VJs come out and performed on it. Silent, who had that first idea and then turned around and saw it, and then our other friend Namaron, uh, both really, really good VJs that I think we both think are some of the best we've ever seen, at least in our scene here. Um,
Mhm.
and they did some incredible work. And it's different because you're used to doing visuals for something on like a 2D canvas, right? Or in the case of the particle screen, just where it pops out a little bit. But having to rethink and redo your whole process for something completely different and unique is a challenge, especially for an artist in this scene who kind of maybe focused more on their own techniques for their own 2D visuals. And so there's like restrictions and things that we had to do to try to make the hologram accessible to anyone who might want to try to VJ on it. Some of those is like resolution, right? We're limited to 1280 by 720 because the free version of the visual software that we were using only goes up to that resolution. So we're limited on some things like that. And so that kind of forces you to rethink how you might approach something artistic. Um, so not just the 3D space, but the restrictions that comes with the system that we built. And some might say, "Oh, that's that's too restrictive or whatever." But I don't know what we saw that Friday. I mean, I was in awe. I was just sitting on the floor, just like, "Whoa, this is crazy."
The jellyfish and then the hand. Oh,
Yeah, yeah, just really cool
so good.
visuals, really cool artistic perspective, and everybody, all the VJs had a different approach to how they did it. Like, I did visuals that night for 2 hours, Apple did an hour, Silent did an hour, and then Nam did an hour. And I think each one of us had our own approach and our own way of kind of like doing our own visuals. Silent didn't even use Touch Designer, the program we were using. She used Notch. She made like her own camera setup to mimic like the design specs that I made for the hologram and integrated it on her own, and it worked. I mean, she was involved since that first day of seeing it, so she had a head start. But it's cool to see a lot of people experimenting with it and what they do with it. So, and I put it out there after the event. We put all of our Touch Designer projects, so anybody that wants to mess with it can just DM us, and we'll get you on the whitelist, and you can experiment with it. But it's not a public world yet. That's something that I think we're just keeping to ourselves. But I do like seeing what people come up with it.
Okay. So I do have another question. How does your system with the holograms differ for VJing versus the 2D? How is the process different between the two? What makes it different and a challenge?
You want
So
to go first on this one?
yeah, so on the 2D screens, you're giving the system just whatever visuals you have already. The only real limitations that you're going to have to put on your existing stuff is that the distribution of the particle screen, being that each particle is way bigger than a single pixel, is going to be much less than a pixel. And so the resolution is like half of 720p, not the hologram on the 2D. And on the 2D, it pops out of the ground based on the brightness of the screen at that point. So on there, you're just using the visuals you already have. You don't have to make new stuff. You don't have to use a specific program. Whereas with the hologram, you basically just have to use our Touch Designer project because it has the setup to send the data through to recreate the 3D models in the world. And without that proper setup, it just looks like junk data. If you could imagine using an image to try and recreate the mesh, but then you use the wrong image, and then it would just have like chunks of color wherever. It would be a mess.
Mm.
So it's basically proprietary how the hologram works, whereas with the 2D stuff, you just get to use your own stuff. You don't have to make new things. You don't have to really tune it. It's a lot more approachable to do the 2D screens, which is why we've had a lot more events there, and we probably will still do a lot more events there than the hologram world.
Hmm. And with the moon pool you mentioned as well, which the one we saw just before this went on, what brought that about, and what is the purpose of that world?
So that world was actually like drawn out and designed by our friend Arby to Arbiter. Do you still say that to? Arby had reached out to me talking about this group called Night Under Light, which was a very like ambient, calm vibe. If the polar opposite of the clubbing scene where everyone's talking and everyone's just in your face and you could kind of hear the music. Whereas Night Under Light was really focused on the actual audiovisual experience that was going on. And after seeing a different world we had, which was made for Modular Monday, Arby decided that a world like this would be a really good fit for their group. So they reached out. We talked about it a little bit. It was supposed to be a commission, but I decided to hold on to it, and we became instead like partners with the Night Under Light group itself. But Taco Bell orders that they bought me because they felt bad. But they had designed the world. I had built it really, really crappily in 3D, but it didn't matter because the light show was there, and at that point we had decent lighting, so it was like really wowing people. I hate the lighting back then, but everyone else liked it. So, but yeah, RB had just reached out. We had made the world for that group and for events with that group, and then we held events with the group, and that's how the world came to be.
Oh, so based on a lot of what I've heard from you about all of the projects, it sounds like you enjoy lighting work, but also it's really complicated. May I ask, why is it complicated?
I hate it so much, but the results are cool. So, um, lighting is really complicated because materials are really complicated. If you could imagine the sun instead of being just an object that is very bright, shooting off an infinite number of rays in all directions. And then all of those rays, when hitting any molecule, bounce around that molecule, get bent by that molecule, and then eventually, when reaching their target, well, they slowly run out of energy as they bounce through, bouncing and scattering and sending their light everywhere else. All shader code is approximations of that process. And it's really weird and complicated because real life is really weird and complicated. If you could imagine, if you've ever zoomed into Velcro and you see all the little hooks, you could imagine every material on Earth when zoomed in close enough to see how it actually interacts with the light physically. It all looks like that. It's all complex. It's all weird. All of the actual shapes of the molecules affect how the light is going to scatter through or like stay on the material. So complicated. Impossible to actually make. And it's very interesting to see the ways we've approximated it.
Oh,
That's why I love it and I hate it. It's interesting, but it's so complicated that it hurts my head.
oh. So I may ask a question that may agitate you or not, but it's not my intention to. How does one work with lighting in Unity and for places like VRChat? May I ask what kind of process is different from making anything else?
Not agitated. I actually was very excited because I was going to ramble towards this. So Unity uses, well, there's two big types of lighting systems. There's forward and deferred. Unity uses forward and also has a deferred option, but we don't use that here. And then Unreal is deferred. When you're rendering an object, the computer, in forward rendering, which is how Unity does it, will first get all of the mesh data. It places all of the individual triangles on the mesh based on a bunch of transformation matrices that basically make it go from position in the world to position on your camera. And then it has to write down the depth so that if something is in front of something else, it's not going to render behind it. Unity doesn't know what order things are in 3D space because sorting is really complicated and expensive, and it would have to do it for each pixel, so that's not going to happen. Now, in forward rendering, when you are rendering all of those individual layers of objects, you're calculating the lighting on top of getting the like depth information written down and the color. So you've only got the color and the depth. In forward rendering, it's calculating all the lighting at once. And the problem is when you're trying to do a lot of different things, especially like post-process lighting, which is basically how my system works. You don't have the information for the actual materials. You don't have the normal maps, which tells the graphic software which direction something's facing, which really changes how the lighting works, of course. Like if you can see my hand, the normals are determining where the hand is relative to the sun and how lit up it should be. So the normals in the back of my hand are facing away, which means it's darker. And that information is so important for rendering lighting, of course. You don't get it in forward rendering. There's ways to get it to right, but it's painful and bad. Now, deferred rendering, the alternative, is where it renders multiple layers of information, not just the color and the depth, but it gets the normals written down into a different texture. It writes down the albedo color. It writes down a bunch of different properties. And then at the very end, after everything's been layered and written down, then it starts calculating the lighting all at once in one big singular pass. So it's called deferred because you're doing the rendering of the lighting after you've already done all the layering and figured out what's actually going to get rendered. Whereas forward, it renders one thing completely, then the next thing completely. So forward versus deferred with a delay, and then finally the whole thing.
Okay. So I'm going to ask another question as well. With lighting, how does it affect performance in a world, and what are some ways to optimize with it or optimize the lighting? Hello, I'm going to quickly interrupt your video. Please come follow us on any of our socials. We have a card down that way in the description, Metaversedegen card.co. You can find us on Discord. You can find us on Twitter, which X, whatever. Right here in this space, you'll see the @ you can find me, Lion. And as well, we have a Patreon, which we've started a whole other show as a thank you for those who've signed up, such as Training Fangs, Forbidden Zero, and Niche. So thank you all for watching the video on how these games are going. I'll leave you to the rest of it. Enjoy.
Fantastic question, because in the nightmare of reading up how every single part of Unity's lighting system works, I have found the nightmares. Lighting has a huge impact on world performance. It's especially with the avatars in there, of course, but because the lighting is so complicated, the more work you can do ahead of time, the better the performance is going to be. So Unity has things called light maps, where instead of bouncing all of those lights all over the place in real time as you're rendering your screen, which would be a bunch of wasted work if it's not changing, what you do in Unity is you mark something as static in the inspector on the top right. You hit static, and then Unity will assign it light maps. And then when you bake your lighting in the lighting menu by going to window lighting, then Unity will bounce the light off of any baked lighting sources in the scene. It will bounce all that light through. It'll do a bunch of calculations and simulations, seeing how that light's going to be transmitted around the world, and bounce around and do all this stuff that you could never do in real time. And then all of that as just flat textures that you can reference. So pre-baking is really important. Real-time lights are really expensive because you can't bake them. By definition, they're real-time instead of baked. So the biggest things you can do for performance with lighting is making sure that everything is baked, making sure you're using light probes to apply the lighting to avatar. They don't have to do extra calculations they don't need to. Make sure everything that you can make static is static, because then the lighting is pre-calculated and you don't have to do it again. Those are the big ones. Real-time lights are bad. Don't use them if you can avoid it. There's a few lighting systems out there like LTCGI, Area Lit, and someday mine will be out alongside those for an alternative that uses a lot of tiny lights. They all use different approaches, but all of them are probably going to be faster than Unity's real-time or their real-time global illumination setup, which is just a mess, a deprecated mess.
Okay. So I'm going to ask another couple of questions that may seem basic, but I'm going to ask them because I don't know. And if I don't know, I'm sure there are people out watching who don't know. What is baked lighting, and how is that important when working with lights?
Sorry, I should have started with that before going into how the baked lighting works.
No, no,
Baked
don't
lighting
apologize.
is...
That's why I ask questions, to clarify.
So in Unity, there's two different kinds of lighting. There's emissive lighting, and then there are real-time... Well, sorry, there's three. There's emissive lighting off of materials, which is where an object glows because the surface of it is glowy, and where you just have something in the emissive slot. It's different on avatars, of course, because they don't get baked, but when you're baking, that's completely separate from your light objects. Now, light objects, you have stuff like a spotlight cone, and it's just a cone, and the further you go from the cone, the less intense the light is. It's real simple. Unfortunately, especially with shadows, it's not actually simple on the shader side. And then you also have distant lights like the sun, where instead of being a cone, it's just a big plane of light. And on the shader, that basically just means that it completely ignores the positional information and just gets the direction off of it, and calculates it as if it was just another light, but a bit heavier on the calculations because they don't have to do the positional stuff. It's lighter, but they do a bit more with it. Basically, for each of those real-time lights that you have to re-render the... It's so dumb. I hate forward rendering. It hurts me. I forgot to mention this in the comparison, that you need to render for each real-time light that could be hitting the object. I think you can have up to 4. It has to render a whole new, pass of the object. So it has to, here's the distant light, render pass. Here's a point light here, another render pass. Point light here, another render pass. Point lights are They're just like, here's a point, it extends out in all directions. Should have said that one. But yeah, real-time lights, they have to actually calculate the lighting information in real time. So, for example, if you could imagine every single object in this world all having to check if they're being hit by a light that's just right here and doesn't move, it's all a wasted calculation if that light doesn't move. Now, if your light doesn't move, you can make it so it's baked instead. And the baking process is the one where it shoots out all of those rays on your computer before you upload, and then saves that information as extra emissive textures, so that the material emits the light that it's supposed to be being hit by the light, and then the light does nothing. So then they just basically don't exist. Besides being applied, sorry, there's a little weird technicals, but basically, real-time lights are expensive, but they are accurate and they calculate stuff in real time while you're playing, whereas baked lighting, you calculate it on your own before you upload the world, and then everyone just gets that information off your computer, so they don't have to recalculate it every time.
Okay. Thank you very much for explaining that. And I'm also going to ask, what are light probes?
Light probes are an optimization and an approximation. What they do is, when you're baking your lighting, Unity keeps track of, actually, I can't remember if the lighting probes happened before or after. Sorry, I'm not sure exactly how they bake on the technical side. I know what they hold is the lighting information that's in the area that they're sitting in. So, for example, if you want avatars in your world to be lit and they don't want it to be real time because you don't want that, you'll put a bunch of light probes in a grid that covers the entire walkable area of your map. And then when you bake them, instead of having to calculate the light coming onto the avatars, they'll just reference the light probe, because the light probe holds the approximate information of what light will be in that area. And as you blend between them, you get fairly okay lighting. It works for, it's close enough.
Like, so imagine like my fist is a light probe and my other fist is a light probe, right? So like, let's say there's a wall here. So this light probe's not going to see as much of the sun, right? Just because when you're baking that lighting in the light probe's getting that approximation, it knows, oh, I'm not getting as much sunlight as this light probe. So if you're near one of these two, it's going to kind of blend between those two approximations of where they're at, and you're going to have those light probes all over, encompassing the whole world. So as you move through these light probes, it's going to get that approximation for where it's at, and then it's going to put that on your avatar.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Good to
The
know.
shader developers will do literally anything. They will move mountains before having to actually calculate how the lighting hits stuff in real time, because it's expensive and bad.
Oh. So is there any ways to calculate it without it being so performance heavy?
Yeah, this more comes down to the individual shader that's being hit by it, because the shader handles what happens when it gets the light. Unity hands the information about the lights that are around it, a reflection probe or two, and the light probes that are around it. But then the shader actually has to do the calculations given the light information that Unity gives it. And it's literally just like, here's the light position and color. You figure out the rest of it. There's a little bit more, but basically that. And then the shaders have to calculate it on their own. So if the shader can crank out more performance, that's good. But avoid real time if at all possible. Real time is bad. And like I said, there's also other lighting systems that people have made that are completely custom. Like LTCGI is really good if you have just one screen in a world. And it's like static and it doesn't move. I think. Does that be static? I can't remember.
I think so. I haven't messed with LTCGI that much.
Yeah, I haven't actually, because I'm trying to sell my lighting system, I'm very wary of even like looking at how the other ones work. So I don't have details, but I know Ariel is really good for having objects that do move in real time and emit light. Besides that, Unity uses very shapes, like simple mathematically, so they can be calculated in the shaders fairly simply. But if you had a more complex objects, like if you could imagine like a teapot that emits light, just all the crevices of the teapot each emit light in a different direction. That's going to be way too complicated. You can't do that. But if you had just a teapot, but then a point light in the center that approximated what the light would look like, that's better.
Okay. So
But the best way is always to just do everything
cool.
baked.
Okay. Thank you so very much for answering all my weird and silly questions. I do appreciate it. I learned a whole lot of things I didn't know prior, so thank you. Now with the particle side of the world, how does that work in terms of with the hologram? How is that built, and how does it really work?
So
So you want me to start, and
particle
then you
world and the
can fill in the
hologram.
technicals?
Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. So we send it a video feed, right? And it's basically UV mapped to whatever we want because she made the version of a particle screen that you can UV map to whatever. And then it looks at, so it's kind of different between the hologram and the particle screen. The particle screen, we send it a texture, which is the video player, and it looks at the brightness of what we're sending it, per pixel, and then it pushes the pixel away from, the starting plane, basically, based off of the brightness of that pixel. And that's the particle screen. It generates, a particle, on a grid based off of the UV. And then the hologram is different because we're not using brightness, which was the big mystery to how we did it. Um,
Ooh.
so we have, like pixel data, right? So you've got RGB, right? Red, green, blue. And so there's different ways of like computing color, right? So there's RGB, and then there's this other thing called HSV, which is hue, saturation, and value. And
Yep. If you've ever used a color picker in basically any paint program, you'll be selecting by having a big color wheel that goes like just all the colors of the rainbow, and you'll have a brightness, and you'll have like how colorful the thing is. That's hue, saturation, and value.
so we're not using RGB, we're using HSV, right? So we're kind of doing this conversion of RGB HSV. But we're sending, over RGB because that's how pixel information is sent, right? So we're replacing RGB with hue, saturation, value for each one of those color channels. And instead of having a green channel, since it's a hologram, we're assuming that the saturation's turned up all the way because it's a hologram. Like it's gonna be bright, right? It's gonna be like full saturation. It's gonna be blown out. Yeah, it's colorful. It's a hologram. So if we assume that value of saturation being maxed, then we know that we can use that other channel. So we have basically a camera setup, six viewpoints looking at a center point, and it's on a video stream, and we can show you that later. And as it's looking at that point, it sends it to the video stream, and it also sends depth information, so how far away each camera is from that center point. And so it's looking in this box, this cube, and whatever you put in there, it's going to send a pixel information out. That's the hue, the color, the depth from camera, as well as the value. And so with that, we're able to do shader magic that she did, and remake it inside of Unity. So we can integrate other programs that, live, not just pre-recordings from external of Vrchat, and plug in visuals.
Oh,
Yep, that's pretty much it. The only interesting thing I think I would add is if you've ever seen screen space reflection post-processing or ambient occlusion post-processing, they also use the depth information to recreate the 3D position, and so does the deferred rendering. Because if you have a box that covers your whole area, the position of each pixel on the box is the position in the XY coordinate, and then you just need the depth, and then X, Y, and Z recreates that position.
oh, I have another question in terms of like the particle system as well. How many particles are in the area where the hologram will be, and how does it rebuild all of that, or use all of those particles to like build objects or depth?
The area is encompassed by 6 360 by 360 screens, which God, that's math. I remember seeing at the very end of all of the math was 1.5 million triangles, which
That sounds about right.
yeah. Yeah, 1.5 million particles. It's a lot, but they're all really simple individually.
Oh, so
And then they're positioned by just recreating the position like I described by getting their position on the texture and then the depth value off of the green channel. And the reason we're using the green channel is the same reason that green screens mask out people on the green channel, because you get more information in the green channel with a lot of different codecs.
oh, that's really good to know. So how with running the hologram system with like 1.5 million particles, because to me, I don't know a whole lot in terms of the Unity Blender side of things, but it sounds like a 1.5 million particles is a lot.
Well,
Yeah,
we're
it
not
is.
doing like it's kind of a trick of the eye, right? What we're doing is there's a point in space, and it's just like and it's a radius around that point, right? So it's really only two values. It's a point and a radius, right? So we have an XYZ value of that position, and then we have a radius that it creates a circle. And she talked briefly about like the normals kind of showing like the sun, right? Well, there's also a way of like using a circle. Sorry, it's my dogs. They just ran
Okay.
downstairs. Hi, buddy.
This
Um,
isn't how we're currently rendering it. This is
oh,
my
it's not.
proposed
Oh
idea on
no.
how to render it faster.
Never mind.
Yeah, no, you're talking about my future plans to make it go faster. Right now,
Never
it's
mind.
doing it the dumb way, where we literally just put mesh data on each point and then render it as if it was just a plane on a mesh. I had planned to mess around with that. It's just complicated. But yeah, you could if you wanted to, you could literally just like write down all the points and their screen paste positions and the depth that they should be rendered at, and then you'd just go through and see the distance from there to there. There's a bunch of other complicated speed up stuff you can do, but we're not doing that. Right now, all we're doing is on each particle position in 3D space, recreated using the depth map and the positions on the texture. It places a quad, and that quad holds there's a little circle texture, and we can apply any texture we want. But if the circle texture isn't present, it does use the distance from the center. Although it's not how we render all the particles, it's how we render them being circular.
Right.
And the nice part is that that's in pixel space. So the closer you get to the circle, the more defined it gets, and you're not getting like the pixelation because it's following your screen. But yeah, that's how those particles work. They're actual meshes. The actual mesh is gigantic. There's a lot of data going back and forth. It's a lot. There's better ways to do it, but this is how I did it.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for explaining that. I do appreciate it. One last question in terms of this before I ask you another silly question. When you're doing things like, for example, the first way you started to describe or the way you're currently doing it, how does the system know in which if an object moves? Like, for example, if you have a stick man waving, how would it know to move the object either mesh or through particles in real time?
That's actually on the VJs. So when the VJs are sending their video signal, it just sends the data for each frame, and then it recreates it in real time. So there's nothing being moved between frames besides in the video encoding codec. So I don't have to worry about any of that. So it just creates it by placing all of the particles where they would be on the current texture. We don't have to really keep track of how things are moving because they're all new each frame.
Okay.
Have you seen those like as a kid? I remember like these little they're like a toy that had like these metal pins that came in. You could like push your hand into it and it pushes the pin
Oh,
out the other side.
yep.
There's like, you know what I'm talking about? So imagine basically like a cube of those, and if you stick your hand in there, and however you move your hand, those pins kind of move in and out.
Yeah.
That's like big picture how it kind of works. Is whatever you put in there, it's got these pins, and those pins are the particles, right? And they move based off of how you move stuff inside of that pin cushion thing.
Okay. Well, I thank you very much. I appreciate the knowledge. Now, on another silly question is going to be a bit of a side tangent a bit, but I am curious. How did both of you get your names? And as well, why the avatars are you in? What makes you use them and or stay in them?
Uh, so I have had an obsession with the apple fruit for a really long time. Ever since I was a kid, it's just my favorite food. I don't know why I'm getting scrunchy while we're talking about Avatar. I'm losing the full body. Anyway, yeah, big fan of apples. The username Apple is obviously taken basically everywhere. I have it in one website, but everywhere else it's taken, so I have to add different stuff to it. And just thought Blossom was a cute word, so we added it. This avatar is uh well, this is what I would wear in real life. Big comfy sweater, comfy big sweatpants, which I'm currently wearing and overheating in right now. Because it's getting summer, but I refuse. But yeah, it kind of looks like me, but cuter, and is in the outfits I would wear. And that's why I'm sticking with it, besides editing it a bunch. Uh, you go. I gotta unstringle.
uh, my name history is very weird. I used to go by. Well, all right, let me back up. So I was a big fan of punk music back in the day, and there's this band called the Viagra Boys. And so I tried to use Viagra Boy as my VRchat username back in like 2017 or whatever that was, and it changed it by default. There was like a word filter set up, and it changed it to I think it was Xanax, yeah, Xanax Boy, and it didn't like warn me. It just changed it. It didn't like say, "Hey, you can't use this name." It just said, "This is your name now." And and so I had that and I thought, afterwards I'm like, all right, I could see like not wanting Viagra Boys to be like, Viagra being in the chat filter, but Xanax isn't. I don't know. Uh, anyways, um, so I ran with that for a couple years, and then you hear a lot of people, especially in the rave scene, come up to you and tell you their life story of how they're addicted to Xanax, and then you kind of get tired of it. Um, and I really like Adidas clothing brand, and so I came up with a weird Adidas name based off of that, I guess. Um,
Oh, interesting.
yeah,
You know,
yeah.
I've never heard a story similar to that. How someone got their name where the whole a system decided to change it to something worse.
I embraced it for a long time. I embraced it for a couple of years, and I stuck with it. And yeah, you know, having having people come up to you all the time and tell you how they're addicted to something is kind of a bummer. So I changed that pretty quick. I mean, I have anxiety too. Like I get it, but the addiction side of it is not something I really wanted people to come up to me bragging about all the time.
Hmm. And
And then I guess I'm in this avatar because there was back in the day very, very limited like masculine avatars. So I kind of fell down like the booth anime avatar pipeline. There's pipelines all over the scene, and I had a lot of furry friends. I had a lot of Gumroad e-boy friends. I didn't really fit with either, so I went the anime avatar route.
hmm, okay. So was this a model you've ran for a while, or is this a fairly new one to what you're wearing?
I bounced around between a lot of them. This one I stuck with now for probably 6 or 7 months. I really like how this one turned out.
Okay.
Different clothes, but same base, same hair.
Alrighty. Well, I will say both. Ooh, don't open the. Why do you open the menu? Hold on. For some reason, the cameras today has been doing a funny thing where I try and change pins, and instead they are opening Opening the menu. So I will say to both of you, there we go. Now it wants to work. Thank you both very, very much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure getting to hear about your project and learning from you as well. So thank you so very much for your time. It's very much appreciated.
Well, thank you for having us.
Oh.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's for me to ramble about garbage.
Well, I wouldn't say it's garbage. I've learned quite a lot of stuff, so I think it's useful. Yeah.
Hopefully, hopefully someone finds it useful. And yeah, shout out to the shader people for making it make sense in my head. There's a lot of good resources out there, which is kind of the life of any platform, especially ones like this.
So where can the audience find you both if they wish to find you? What would you like to shout out?
Shout out to
Go ahead.
SNRlabs, our group. Shout out to your Twitter, the only place where I post anything because I did my Twitter.
My Twitter handle is axdxdos, and I guess for me, just shout out to the Modular Monday crew and Shaggy and Silent and all the people that have really been supportive of our weird experimental projects over the last year for sure. Oh, and also we'll make a post at some point and put up a page when Apple's lighting system's ready. She's in the final stages of getting it ready.
Oh. Well, all the links in the Hoobly What's It will be right down that way. You just kind of take the mouse or scroll up a little bit down to where it says description, and there's a whole bunch of fun information from the world we're in, all their links, as well as much more stuff for the hashtags for everything if you are into that kind of thing. But thank you both again for coming on, and thank you and the audience for listening. I would give Raptor the thing to close this, but again, he's working, so with that said, feel free to go pick up a new skill, whether it's Lights, Unity, Blender, VJing, DJing. There's lots of people in the community you can learn from. You may find a new craft, hobby, or trade. Enjoy the rest of your day, folks.